And with that, thank you, Josephine, and thanks to Brimbank Council for sponsoring these workshops. Today, we're going to talk about cover letters. Now, they are part of what we call an application toolkit, often the part that's overlooked. In fact, many people say they're underrated. And there's a reason why that is. Because unlike a resume, recruiters and employers aren't always sure what they're going to see in a cover letter, and therefore they don't always consider it has considerable value. And you can't really blame them, because if you think about most cover letters that you might have written or might have seen, if you've ever done any hiring, most cover letters go like this: to whom it may concern, RE, your advertised job, blah, 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 date, etc. Please accept this letter in support of my application for the advertised role of XYZ at your company. I've got XYZ years of experience and great communication skills, and I always do what I say I'm going to do. And then there's a little bit of a rehash of their resume, and that's about it. Thank you very much for listening to me. I look forward to hearing from you soon, and so forth. Occasionally, it might say something along the lines of, in my role at, for example, Woolworths, I managed 5 sales staff and a budget of $3 million. I was responsible for 6 accounts and 3 product lines. I'd really like to work for you. I'm ready for a new role. I'm great at what I do, and I look forward to hearing from you. And that is pretty much the stock standard approach that people take for cover letters. And you can't blame them either, because they haven't been told otherwise. Usually it's seen as a little add-on. Oh, it's a have. It's a little bit like your old school title page for an essay or any other form of business case or report that you might put up. But your cover letter is actually a whole lot more. And it's a really missed opportunity if you don't utilize this piece of communication effectively. So if you want to talk about cover letters, first and most important thing to consider is don't bore your audience. If you say the same thing as everyone else says and add in the same details that are already in your resume, you can't blame your reader for getting bored. The recruitment process is tough for them, not just for you. And that's a really important consideration, because in today's day and age, an employer might receive up to 200 applications or more for a particular role. In many cases, they'll receive applications from people who aren't even qualified or meet the requirements for the position. And they'll also receive a significant number of applications from people who could all do the job. And if they're all telling those potential employers or recruiters the same thing, there's no key messaging in the cover letters that helps them identify why that person's the best fit for the role, why they're applying for the role in the first place, and why they should be selected or shortlisted for an interview. A cover letter is an opportunity to convey those key messages, because there's not the rigid structure that you have with a resume, so to speak. Now, so why should we use a cover letter, and when should we use it? Only if we're going to engage our audience, because now's our chance. What they want to see is something interesting. They want to see evidence that you really want the role, and not just because you need a paycheck, and not just because you've been unemployed for the last 6 months, and not just because you currently hate your boss and you really need to get out of the role that you're in. These are all really valid reasons for wanting to secure a new role, but that's not what the employer wants to hear. It's not important enough to them. The cover letter should also give them proof that this isn't one of those 200 applications you're sending out. So you want it to be tailored and customized for every single job you apply for. In fact, the biggest issue that I often find when working with clients in private career practice is they'll ask me to help put together a resume and a cover letter and a LinkedIn profile. And there's an assumption that all 3 of those documents remain static. If I can convey anything to you today, it is that those documents should firstly never remain static. None of those 3 pieces of communication should remain the same throughout your job search. You should be tweaking them constantly as you refine the types of roles you're applying for, refine the types of employers you want to be appealing to or applying to, etc. There's not a whole lot else that you can do other than communicate via these 3 channels. So you need to use them as effectively as possible. And to do that, you've got to consider this. If someone has something to say to you and you need to hear something from them, if it is a generic message, you're not overly interested. But if it is customized to what you need and what you're looking for, you're far more likely to be engaged. So ultimately, put yourself in the shoes of your reader, your recruiter, your employment agency, the employer themselves, and understand what it is that they need to hear from you to make a hiring decision. Because of that, your resume should be tailored according to the requirements of the role. And your LinkedIn profile could potentially be tweaked as it's more general activity. As you start to say, okay, these are the types of roles I'm finding I'm applying for more and more. I might change some of the keywords in my profile to reflect what's in the job descriptions I'm targeting. The flip side to that is your cover letter is the one document that you can change dramatically and should change dramatically every single time you apply for a job. You might find that there are certain paragraphs that you cut and paste and reuse and tweak, etc. But ultimately, if you're not changing the bulk of your cover letter every time you apply for a role, you're not applying to the best of your ability and you're losing out on opportunities. What an employer is really looking for is a sense of your purpose, a sense of your fit for the role beyond what's on your resume. And you can do this in two different approaches. The first is the more formal one, and then we have one that is a little more casual. So how do we do that? One is an approach whereby we create a business case. So instead of treating a cover letter as a simple message, hey, I'm applying for the role. Here's what I already know about the role because you told me in the position description. Here's what I can tell you about you. It's also on my resume, and end of story. This is why I'm here. Instead of that, think about how you would potentially put forward a business case. And if you haven't created a business case, maybe think about if you were to create a job ad or a product advertisement or a sales document. What you're trying to do when you apply for a role is treat yourself as an asset, as a commodity, something they want or need. You've got to pitch yourself to them, and your cover letter is the only place you can do that. In your cover letter, you explain the value you bring and you tie that directly to the requirements or the outcomes of the role or the organization. Now, how do you know what those outcomes or requirements are? The only thing that you can do is you can look closely at the PD. You can go to their website and find out more about the organization themselves. And if the job's listed by a recruiter, you call up the recruiter. Now, I know that is easier said than done. Recruiters are notoriously difficult to get hold of and notoriously very good at not replying to phone calls or voicemails. To that, all I can say is be persistent. Try as hard as you possibly can to get through to the recruiter to find out a little bit more about the role, just enough information to allow you to tailor your application accordingly. This is really important. That research piece, I'll harp on about it again and again, because again, the more information you have about the role, the easier it is for you to tailor your application. So you present your pitch, you explain the value you bring, relate that back to what they need. You detail how you can help them achieve what they need to achieve. So if, for example, it's an organization that says that they're rapidly growing, or maybe they don't say that, but you go to their website and you find out that's the case. You can add in a line in your cover letter about how you support, even if it's an admin role or a customer service role, whether it's a marketing role or an operations role, tell them how you can use your role or that your purpose and your skills to further their overarching end game, so to speak, their overarching strategy. You want to help them achieve what they need to achieve. The other thing you can use your cover letter for is to outline the potential pitfalls and offer a solution. And by pitfalls, I mean reasons why maybe you aren't the right fit, reasons why maybe this isn't the perfect, I'm doing this right now, so I want to step into it right now, and offer them a reason why that's okay. If, for example, you only meet 75% of the job requirements, you can explain that remaining percentage, it's there to allow you to grow. Because there's that room for you to grow as an employee, you're going to be a more committed, loyal, dedicated individual. You're going to be someone who potentially doesn't have preconceived ideas about how to do the role. You'll bring fresh perspective. You offer a different way of looking at things. You can also talk about your motivation. You can talk about engagement, talk about how the opportunity to learn and grow and thrive gives you the motivation to give your all to the position. Okay. Sorry, just a few technical difficulties at this end. Now, also in your business case, provide evidence to support your proposal. I can do this for you because I've done A, B, and C here. Another consideration is to use persuasive language. So always use active language. And the best way to determine if you're using active language, read your cover letter out loud to yourself. If it sounds like a strong, reasonably formal, yet conversational tone, that's what you're looking for. You want to use the pronoun I, but you want to make sure you're not saying it in every sentence. You want to help them make a decision ultimately by presenting yourself as this asset that they really, really need for their business. Now, the other way you can approach your cover letter is to tell a story. Now, this is something that people don't use often enough because there's this perception that your job application documents need to be rigid and formal. Now, this is only the case in maybe 30% of applications for particular disciplines and particular occupations, generally things like accounting and medicine, maybe even nursing, to an extent teaching. But even within those more formal applications, telling a story helps you convey why you're the best fit for the role. It allows you to showcase your communication skills, to persuade the decision maker because you're making them care. It allows you to foster connection and engagement, and it helps you drive that instinct and likability. That's really important because people hire people. If in your cover letter, you can convey a sense of the type of person you are and how that translates into the world of employment, then there's that instinctive, oh, but I just like her. Yeah, she's got the same skills and experience as the other 10 candidates, but there's something about the way she wrote that it resonated, it appealed. And most employers, they don't think much further than that, other than that likability factor, but it is the driving force behind the employment decisions that are made. It also helps convey who you are as a human. And that's really important because employers employ people. They want to know who you are. So the idea behind telling a story or using narrative, we'll talk about that a little bit later when I talk about the structure of your cover letter. But essentially, it's about formally acknowledging what they need from you. And then when you explain to them in that third or fourth paragraph, this is what I bring to the role. Say, for example, you're returning to work after taking 3 years off for raising children. You can say that in no uncertain terms and own it. And some of the ways I've seen that represented really well is to state, I left the workforce for 3 years, or I paused my career for 3 years to undertake the most challenging role of my life, which has required me to develop the ability to thrive under pressure, to negotiate highly effectively with demanding individuals, particularly those who are 2 years old and refuse to wear clothes, and making sure that I keep them alive and keep these incredibly important resources fed, watered, and healthy. Play games with how that paragraph sounds. But ultimately, it's about throwing in a tiny bit of humor or a sense of relatability. It could be, I've been driving trucks for the last 6 years and heavy machine operations, well, that's just a little bit too heavy for me now. My back doesn't appreciate it. I'm really looking for a role that'll allow me to use my intellect, not my raw strength. This is the right role for me because it allows me to do that. So that's ways that you can incorporate that little bit of sense of self and that little bit of personality and tell a story about why you're applying for this role, why this is the right fit for you, or why you're the right fit for them. I once worked with a lawyer who very successfully applied for a role after 6 years out of the workforce by explaining that no court was as demanding, and no judge was as critical as her children and the schools that they attended, and the negotiation and the complaints and the conflict resolution and all of those skills that she utilised in that time off. And you can use the same approach particularly effectively if you're changing careers as well, to explain in really positive terms why the previous career path was not for you and why this future career path is. The other thing that cover letters are really, really valuable for is they allow you to address barriers to employment. A barrier to employment is when you don't meet all the criteria. If you don't meet every single requirement in position description or job advertisement, that's okay. It's not always a problem, but you have to make sure you address the barriers. That means don't let them be the big white elephant in the room. Speak to them, acknowledge them, but offer them a solution. So some of those things that are barriers might be a lack of relevant experience in the role or industry, missing qualifications or certifications, outdated technical skills, the need to relocate or to change career altogether, and returning to work after a career break. So say, for example, you're applying for a role and it requires a certain qualification and you don't have that qualification, but instead you've got 7 years of relevant experience. Or perhaps you have a similar qualification where you've covered the same subjects. Or maybe it's a case whereby you are happy to pursue that qualification as you undertake the work itself, or you're currently enrolled in a short course, whatever it might be. Acknowledge that you don't have the qualification, but then give them that justification and a solution as to how you're going to address it. It could be that you're applying for a role in the fashion retail industry, but you come from hospitality. Draw parallels, acknowledge, I don't have direct industry experience or direct knowledge of this industry, but I know about this. And then you might write a line about what you know about the fashion industry that's particularly pertinent to the role. So maybe it's a role as a buyer for certain products within the store, or maybe it's a role as a merchandiser. You might say that you've got customer service experience, which is relevant in the hospitality sector. So you understand how things like buyer behavior, you understand things around how people make buying decisions. You understand what appeals to people. Maybe you understand how to present items in an appealing manner, which obviously correlates with things like merchandising. So look for those points of commonality and then acknowledge the issue, explain what you know about it instead of what you don't have, and then explain where you've done something similar. Another key consideration around cover letters is who is going to read your cover letter? Is it a recruiter or an employer? Is it an expression of interest that you need to apply for or that you need to present? Are you responding to criteria or do you need to answer specific questions? Now, that's a really important one. You need to know who's going to read it and you need to know what they're looking for, particularly in public sector applications or applications with multinational corporations who use things like psychometric testing or who use behavioral questions within the application process. They may actually ask you to answer a specific question within your cover letter. So make sure you read the position description of the job ad really carefully and reference what they might be looking for. Criteria is a really interesting one, and we could do a whole separate session on what that looks like. It's predominantly used in the public sector, healthcare, teaching, local, state, and federal government, or most roles require some sort of response to criteria, which is essentially, if you haven't done one before, it's a way of looking, they give you a list of what they absolutely need, things like ability to communicate with influence, ability to manage competing priorities, ability to work effectively in a team, strong administration skills. Those are some really common ones that come up. When you respond to those criteria or when you reference or address the criteria within your cover letter, you are expected to provide a couple of examples of how you meet those criteria. And in those examples, you might state, this was the situation, this is the action that I took, and this was the outcome, making sure that you showcase, for example, your communication and time management skills. And you incorporate that within the cover letter. I'll show you where exactly that sits shortly, where we walk through the structure of a cover letter. Some cover letters you're actually asked to produce a statement of claims. In others, you're asked to respond to specific questions. Those questions are predominantly very similar. It is, why do you want to apply for it? Why are you applying for this role? How do your skills and experience make you a good fit for the role? And there might be one around technical skills, or there might be one which allows you to project and forecast. It might be, if you were responsible for a team of 10 sales representatives, what sort of sales tactics would you use to help them achieve and hit their sales targets? So sometimes there are questions like that that you do need to reference within the cover letter. Now, just taking a step back, whether you're writing to a recruiter or an employer is quite important. When you write a cover letter and address it directly to an employer, you want to show them what you know about their organization or their company. And I'll show you how that looks shortly. But if you're applying to a recruiter, your approach needs to be slightly different, because very often that job ad will not tell you which company they're recruiting for. So if that's the case, you're appealing to the recruiter. The way to appeal to them is to understand how they operate. Now, a recruiter is not there to represent your interests. A recruiter is there to represent their client's interests. Their client is the employer looking for staff, okay? Make the process easy and acknowledge and recognize that, and your cover letter is key to doing so. If you do that, you've got a good chance of being selected for an interview. So you might reference, as opposed to referencing in the cover letter what you know about the company and why you want to work for them, you might reference the type of clients that the recruiter is responsible for. I know, and you can do that by doing a little bit of research. If it's a recruiter with Hayes or Hudson, maybe you can call them up and find out which sector that particular recruiter recruits for. They are usually responsible for particular sectors. So say if it's for retail, you can say that you're particularly looking for roles within the retail sector, and you know that Hayes is a leading recruiter in this space and have represented or had clients including Woolworths, Myer, Wesfarmers, whatever it might be. So that's where you change up how you present the information or what information you present in the cover letter. It's really important that you show them what you know about the organization and link that to why you want to work for them. Okay, so let's approach whether it's to the employer or the recruiter. This is the most common form of cover letter, so it's the one we're going to focus on, and I'll walk you through the structure. There's a few things that you need to look for before you start writing. Look for the person to address the letter to, an opportunity to reference a contact or someone by name, and make sure you do some research. So essentially what that means is, if you know that the person listed as a contact for that particular job is a direct line manager or an HR associate, the only way to know that firstly is to look them up on LinkedIn or to Google them, unless it's actually written on the job ad, which is quite rare, but does occasionally occur. If it is, make note of that. Contact that person. Find out, as part of your bit of sleuthing or digging deep for that information that you need to reference in the cover letter, find out who you should address it to. If they say, oh yeah, just address it to me, oh, that's great. By the way, what's your department? That way you'll know if you're applying for a customer service role within the sales team, or whether you're applying for a role within the operations team, you'll find out who is reading the cover letter and where it's going to go. So if it's someone within the team that role sits, you know it's the direct employer. Otherwise, it's most likely to be the HR department. And therefore, you know that that's the person that you need to appeal to. Very often, they have a set matrix of what they're looking for. So you need to be really specific around, okay, this is going to HR. I need to make sure that I've cross-referenced all of the requirements of the role within this cover letter. Whereas if it's the direct employer, so the line manager for the role, they're a lot more interested in basically how you can do this job to make them do their job better. Okay, ultimately, that's why people hire people. It's because there is stuff that needs to get done to allow them to do what they need to do. And you need to reference that. When you do that, there's that aha light bulb moment for them. Oh yeah, they know what I need. They've already anticipated that. You might have only put down one line about it, but just referencing that is valuable, and it makes them sit up and take notice. All right. So with all of that information, you might be sitting there going, okay, well, that's well and good. That's a whole bunch of stuff I've got to consider. But I'm sitting here with a blank paper in front of me. How do I write this thing? So I'm going to help you. You start with the structure. Now, of course, I haven't added it here, but you must actually start with your contact details in a letterhead. Make sure it's not in the header of the document. The reason you do not put it in the header is because applications are often processed by something called applicant tracking systems. It's a piece of software. If you listen to my workshop on resume writing, you'll find a whole piece about what ATS is. If you don't know, please find out. It's absolutely critical. If you put information in your documents in the footer or the header, some pieces of ATS software do not pick it up. Therefore, it doesn't get pulled up and processed in the form, I suppose, that the employer will use to review your information. Don't make it difficult for them to contact you. So step one, make sure that your address is at the top, but not in the header. Address, email, phone number, all your contact details. Then you've got your date. You've got the company name if you know it, the department name if you know it, and the person that you're actually addressing it to. So don't forget how to write a formal letter is what I'm saying. Then you have dear and whoever you're addressing it to. And then you have reference, so RE, and the reference number, the position description, or the position itself, the name, or where it was advertised. So RE, sales coordinator with Energy Australia, ref 1265. Okay, so the reference number is often on the job ad itself. Then you launch into your introduction, paragraph 1. In paragraph 1, who are you? What's your unique value proposition? Those are the key messages you need to convey. So how do you do that? Ask yourself these questions. How would you answer the question, tell me about yourself? So you can use your cover letter preparation as a bit of interview training if you like, and ask yourself that question. If I was sitting in an interview and I needed to tell them who I was and answer that question, what would I say? Write it down and then make that a bit more concise and turn that into your introduction. Another approach might be to answer these questions: who I am, what I do, where I do it, and why. Okay, so always look at who you are and what your proposition is. You're a sales coordinator. What makes you really good at sales? You are a customer service representative. What's your secret weapon? What is that unique blend of skills, experience, qualifications, credentials, life experience, personal attributes that make you the better candidate for the role? In that first paragraph, the other way to approach it is, if I have 60 seconds to get in front of the interviewer, what do I need to tell them about me to convince them to give me a shot at the job? If you ask yourself these questions and make sure that you put it in more formal language as to who you are and how many years of experience that you have or what your value proposition is, you'll immediately draw in the reader and they will read on to your next paragraph. Now, at the end of that paragraph, it's always valuable if you can reference a contact or a name. So it could be, this is who I am. I'm a really amazing career coach because I've got 10 years of experience and I really specialize in giving clients practical advice on how to change and manage their careers moving forward. I would like to apply for this particular role, or I spoke to X, Y, and Z. I spoke to Mary in your HR department about this position, and the information that she gave me led me to the conclusion that that the role that you have advertised certainly would be an excellent fit for me, or I would be a great fit for the role, yada, yada, something along those lines. And then launch into paragraph 2, the purpose of the letter. Why are you writing it? I've spoke to Mary about X, Y, and Z. I've realized I'm a great fit for the role, or I think I'd be a good fit for your organization. Please accept this letter together with my attached resume. I know that's a pretty cliched standard sentence, but you can include it in support of my application for the role. If you're using that narrative structure, it might be more, this leads me to the conclusion that this is the perfect role for me, and I would really enjoy working with your organization. Is when in Bunnings, and he knows that Bunnings is recruiting for a role in the tool shop, and the role hasn't been advertised yet, but you want to express your interest. So Ben suggested to you, get a head start on everyone else and actually write to the tool shop manager with an expression of interest. And that's another way you can leverage your contacts and actually get a foot in the door beyond the traditional job ad response process. Okay, so explain what you're doing. Tell them if you're following up a phone call where they requested a resume. And if it's to a recruiter, here's where you get to explain what types of roles or organizations you're looking for. So if you're responding directly to an employer, it would be, great role, perfect for me. This is what I want to apply for. I am applying for it. Expression of interest, heard about this, want to express my interest in it. But if it's to a recruiter, it'll be along the lines of either in response to a direct role. So I saw that you are recruiting for the role of marketing director with Colesmeyer, for example, and I'd like to apply for this particular role. I understand that I'm also like to let you know that I understand that you recruit for marketing director and executive position roles across the entire retail and hospitality sectors. And these are the types of positions I'm looking at. I'd also be interested in head of commercial. I'd also be interested in national sales manager roles, etc. So when you are responding to a recruiter, you can actually reference the fact and draw light to the facts that they're not just recruiting for this role, they're recruiting for a multitude of roles. And very often, the reason why recruiters don't bother reading cover letters is because they only reference the one role that someone's applying for. And really, they're looking for you as an asset. They're looking at you as an asset to see where you would potentially fit amongst all of their clients. And it's a lost opportunity if you don't let them know that they have other clients and that you are open to being considered for other roles should you be a better fit for some of those other clients that they might have. The only way they know that is if you bring it up in your cover letter and then you tell them what type of roles and organizations you're interested in. Don't expect them to join the dots. The whole part of it, the whole reason why cover letters exist is because it's a mode of communication. It's not just a sticker that you slap on the front of your application, tick box, it's done. This is a way for you to actually get a message across. Utilize it effectively. Okay. So paragraph 3. In paragraph 3, we talk about your intent. Why do you want to apply for this role or opportunity? This is where you say what your motivations are. Okay, they want to know why you're applying, not just that you've got 8 years of experience in customer service and they're looking for 8 years of experience in customer service. They want to know what drives you. They want to know why you're bothering to apply. Do you care about this organization? Is it a more flexible role? Does it allow you to use skills and experience you don't have? Is it a role that offers you space for growth? Is it because you're looking for a more dynamic industry? Is it because you're passionate about working in that particular sector? And then you can add on to that what skills and experience you offer in reference to it. And ideally, you want to do that and reference the keywords. So use the keywords that they use in the job description themselves. So for each of these paragraphs, there's usually one sentence for each of the bullet points I have on these slides to give you a guide. You do still want to keep your cover letter to 1 page. So don't include any extraneous information. Be really clear about the message that you want to convey and just say it. Don't worry about the formality in the first step. Just say what you want to say, and then you can go back over your draft and you can polish it up a little. The exception to the 1-page rule is if you're responding to criteria. If you are responding to criteria, here is where you provide your examples. So you have your intent, why you want to apply for the role, and then you lead in from that what skills and experience you offer, and then you provide evidence of that with your criteria response. I know that this role requires high-level communication skills, a strong understanding of financial administration, and significant working knowledge of XYZ legislation applicable to ABC department, okay? Then you provide evidence of your ability to meet those criteria by providing a couple of examples that showcase the attributes and the knowledge that they're looking for. But remember, only do that if you're responding to criteria or to a public sector role. Then you move into paragraph 4 or section 4. Why do you want to work with this particular organization? So paragraph 3 was about you. Paragraph 4 is about them. And this is really important. This is where you demonstrate what you know about the organization. It's where you reference their strategic plan, any innovative things that they've done. You might want to reference their mission statement. This is where you concisely explain how their values and purpose aligns with yours. And if it's the public sector that you're applying to, here's where you reflect the APS, so that's federal government roles, or VPS, that's Victorian Public Sector, values in their ethical frameworks. Now, you might be saying, well, how on earth do I know any of this? Well, you got to do your research. There's no shortcuts in this process, but the people who do their research, the ones who get their cover letters read, and the ones who get their cover letters read are usually the ones who can make a strong case and a lead in that says, okay, I'm going to bother looking at that resume. I'm going to see this as a person, not just as 2 documents sitting in front of me. And there is always, even if you're not the best fit for the role, there's often that sense of they've gotten to get to know you a little bit, even if it's on paper. And that knowing, that engagement, that interpersonal communication, but via a static format, can actually lead to you being brought in for an interview, or at least called up to speak to about an interview, where others might not have that opportunity. So to find all this information, you research. You follow this organization on LinkedIn. You see who works there, if there's anyone in your network or in your 2nd or 3rd degree contacts. and you ask them what they know about the organisation or department or company. You look up their website, you have a look at their About Us page. Usually that's enough information. Sometimes they might have a media page. You might want to look them up and see where they've been in the news. So, for example, if you're applying for an organisation, I don't know, maybe like Vic Police, they've been under a lot of scrutiny, a lot of intense public scrutiny recently. Their actions have been called into question, but equally they've been seen as an absolute critical safeguarding provider, I suppose, for the community. So if you want to find out what's been said about VicPol and potentially reference that in your application, if it's going to work to your favour, then yes, you go to their website. Yes, you look them up on social media. You ask anyone you might know, who might know, but you also do something called setting up a Google alert. So say you don't know anything about the sector or the organisation or the company that you're targeting, it might be worth gathering information over a couple of days. So you literally Google the words Google alert and you say we're using VicPol, you might use Victoria Police, you might use law enforcement. If it's around digital marketing in the grocery and supermarket sector, you might look at Woolworths, digital marketing. You might look at digital marketing, groceries, Australia. You want to find something you can reference. So it might be, I know that your competitor is doing scanless checkouts. I know that this is the new innovation in this space. I know that Amazon, you have a big box multinational competitor in this space, but you would be more agile and X, Y, and Z. Whatever it is, you can either talk about them in context, so the organization and its competitors or what's arising in this field or this sector, or you can talk about the organisation itself. I know that Brimbank Council is a wonderful place to work because you have a strong culture of high performance. It's a very collaborative workplace. And I can see in your strategic plan that in your Vision 2025, you are committed to enhancing the service of community delivery considerably by 25%. You are committed to engaging migrants more effectively in the workforce by 2027. This is something that I'm passionate about and would like to help you work towards. That's how you reference it. It doesn't have to be a thesis. It just has to show you know about them and you give a damn. Ultimately, that's what they need to see in a cover letter. And then there's paragraph 5. This is where you address those barriers to employment. And I spoke about those earlier. So say, for example, you're lacking experience. Say, for example, you don't have a particular qualification, you're a newly arrived migrant, you don't have sector-based experience, you've been out of the workforce for X, Y, Z years, you don't have the requisite skills. The general rule of thumb is if you meet 75% of the requirements of a position description or a job ad, you should apply anyway, okay? And very often you will still be considered for the role, but only if you address the lack or the space that you don't meet, okay? You address what's been left over and you bridge that gap for them, okay? You do it by concisely explaining the perceived issue and adding a positive spin, okay? So like I said before, I've been out of workforce for the last 6 years, but in that last 6 years, these are the skills that I've gained instead. I don't currently work in the energy sector. I currently work in the pharmaceutical sector, but working in the pharmaceutical sector has allowed me to gain significant experience working in a stringently regulated environment under intense public scrutiny with legislative requirements, etc. So you're drawing parallels and then you're explaining how your experience is relevant, but because you don't have exactly the experience that they're looking for, you actually offer a diversity of perspective. You've got some innovative ways of doing things that you might be able to bring over to this role. It might be a role that you're looking at with a local school. You haven't worked in the Catholic sector, for example, but you've worked in the Anglican sector. So you look for parallels and you provide a bridge. I don't have this, but I do have that. This is why it's actually valuable to you. It's also about articulating your capability. Really important that if there is a barrier to employment, don't harp on only about what you have done. Talk about what you know and what you can do. Your resume predominantly does speak to what you have done. It is very much reliant on experience, even though I do try to work with clients to help them include a capability statement in the CV as well, if they're applying for roles that are a progressive role, a promotion, a bit of a stretch or a reach, not an exactly, I'm doing this, And I'm going to move into that, and it's a direct parallel. So where there are those opportunities for stretching and reaching and changing, if you articulate what you can do, that's what an employer needs to hear, not just what you have done. It's also great to explain the value of giving you the opportunity to grow. Ultimately, an employer spends an awful lot of money recruiting a candidate. That's you as a job seeker. When they do that, they want to know that you're going to stick around, but they also want you to do the job that they need done, and they want you to do it yesterday, 9 times out of 10. It is unfortunately rare at the moment to find enough companies and organizations and departments and businesses that are forward thinking enough to think, how do I keep this person on? And so sometimes you have to present that to them, or often that's something that they think about after they've and this happens often after they've interviewed 3 or 4 candidates, and they come away from that process saying, oh, they're all too overqualified. Now, usually overqualified is code for they've done all of this before, they know all of this already. Will they really want to do it again? Will it be boring for them? They're probably just going to leave very quickly. And when they leave, that causes tremendous stress and effort and money to the organization. So if you explain that the value to them of giving you an opportunity to grow into the role means that greater commitment, enhanced focus, loyalty, all of those attributes, it will be valuable to them. They just need you to explain it to them, okay? They need you to join the dots because they're overwhelmed by all of the applications they're receiving, and they're not thinking necessarily strategically at this point in the hiring process. And as I said, some of the ways that you can navigate these employment barriers is to describe what you've done that's similar, draw those parallels for them, and demonstrate what you know that is relevant. Okay, so that might be, say, for example, you want to move into biosecurity, and you've worked in a similar role, but it's not been the same. But what you have done is in your spare time, you read everything there is to know about biosecurity. Say you work in agriculture. Maybe you want to move into biosecurity, but your only experience has been working with biosecurity officers. So if that was the case, then what you would do is that you would explain that you've worked with them, you know what they do, you have an appreciation and understanding of their role and the value of their role within the agricultural ecosystem, for example. And because you're passionate about this, you have sought out additional information by, and I'm pulling strings here. It could be that you've joined a particular industry association. It could be that you've attended some seminars or some short courses. It could be that you've listened to podcasts, you've subscribed to some journals or some blogs. Either way, whatever it is that you've done, demonstrate a passion for that knowledge and a willingness to go out and get it. Okay, so in summary, your cover letter is to prove you're right for the role. If you can look at it and say, okay, I've done these things, and it doesn't have to be all of these things. This is not I've done A, tick, I've done B, tick, and it's with paragraph by paragraph. Instead, this is more of step back and get a sense of what we've communicated here. Have I demonstrated that I understand what they need? Have I provided evidence of what I've done, what I know, and what I can do? Have I shown them I'm genuinely interested in them and the role? Have I understood and reflected the culture and the type of work? Have I explained how I work? Have I answered any questions they've asked me for? And have I potentially shown a little bit of personality? Most importantly, have I joined the dots? Have I shown them that this is I'm opening up a professional conversation, a two-way street, not just a, do you have X, Y, and Z? Yes, I have X, Y, and Z, done. It's a far more dynamic process than that. And remember, the cover letter, it's just one part of the journey or one part of that toolkit. Consider it, and you can't just treat one piece of this toolkit or one piece of equipment in isolation from the others. You need to look at them all and say, okay, does my resume provide further evidence to support what I've said in my cover letter? Does my LinkedIn profile offer a summary of this, but is it written in the first person so they get that sense that they're talking to me directly? Have I reached out to the recruiter or the contact person? Have I followed up with a thank you note or an email? What am I going to do next to make sure that my cover letter has been seen by the right person? Am I going to take my learnings from one application and apply them ongoing? Am I going to seek feedback? And I'm going to be slightly annoying and call the recruiter until they tell me why their client didn't engage me for this particular role and what I can do better or what I need to explain more clearly next. And that summarizes, in a nutshell, most of what you need to know about cover letters. But I must emphasize here that cover letters are a really customized piece of work here. A copy and paste job's not going to do it. And if you do need customized advice, please feel free to reach out. Connect with me on LinkedIn and you'll get lots of advice that way as well. Or contact me directly via email and be happy to answer your questions.